She walked home one night not knowing she was going to cross paths with some of the most dangerous men with a string of criminal convictions. Anita was known for her beauty, but on the inside, she was even more beautiful. Friends and family described her as someone with compassion and empathy. Anita was a great listener, someone who would focus entirely on the person speaking to her. She was encouraged to pursue modeling. She had even won the Miss Western Southern pageant in 1979. But this just wasn't her calling. She chose a different path. She decided to follow in her mother's footsteps by becoming a nurse. She met her husband while training for her nursing degree, John Cobby, an older trainee nurse. Anita made the first move because John felt she was out of his league. Their relationship blossomed, leading to their engagement in 1981 and marriage in 1982, but they had been separated at the time, and so she lived with her parents, and that's where the 25-year-old was headed to on the night of February 2nd, 1986. Anita was returning home after attending a dinner with her friends. She had just finished her shift at the Sydney hospital. She got onto a train just a few minutes after 9 p.m. Anita looked for a payphone once at the Blacktown station in outer Western Sydney before 10 p.m. This was the usual routine for her, as her father Gary Lynch would pick her up, but unfortunately the phone box at the station had been broken by vandals, so Anita decided to walk home. This would be the last walk she would ever take. Anita would never see the evil that was coming. Her world was about to cross paths with some of the most dangerous men. As she was walking, a car slowed down beside her and came to a halt. Inside were 5 men with lengthy criminal records. 2 men jumped out of the car and pulled Anita inside, where there were 3 other men. These men were John Travers, 18, Michael Murdoch, 19, Michael Murphy, 33, Gary Murphy, 28, and Les Murphy, 22. The details of this case are graphic, so just a warning. While in the car, Anita was asked to take her clothes off. She refused and begged the men to let her go. She explained to the men she was married and she was menstruating, but these men did not care. They beat her up for disobeying them. Once they were done, they stripped her of her clothes and made her perform oral sex on them. They then stole her money to use for fuel. On the drive, they held her down and continued to essay her and drove her to a secluded paddock. When they got there, Anita was so badly injured from the beating, she could not move, so the men dragged her across barbed wire and dumped her there. Did they stop there? No, they continued to essay her. Then they slit her throat so badly that her head was nearly decapitated. The men then burnt Anita's clothes and then dumped their car and set it on fire, thinking they had gotten rid of all evidence. Meanwhile, her parents were waiting at home for her. Her father looked outside and saw the most sinister-looking face in the clouds, something that will always haunt him. At the same time, Anita's friend was in bed, having a nightmare. She dreamt that Anita came to her and told her that she wouldn't come to work the next day. She told her friend, You have to come into work, but Anita kept saying, No, I'm dying. At first, Anita's parents thought that maybe she was staying at a friend's home, but when she didn't show up the following day, they alerted authorities. Anita's disappearance was all over the news. After 2 days, a farmer heard his cows making noises and huddled around something. He thought it might be a dead animal, but there, laying on his property, was Anita's body. He immediately called 911. The farmer told police that the night before he heard a woman screaming, but he didn't think much of it because it was common for teenagers to invade his field.
I just couldn't believe it was a human there laying in the paddock. I thought it was, a doll or something at first.
I can't help but think that, what would happen if he did go out in the field that night? I don't blame the farmer though. There was a chance that Anita would still be here today, but there's also the possibility these 5 men would turn on him as well. Anita's husband identified her body by her wedding ring. The couple was in the midst of reconciling before her murder. Anita's parents came into the mortuary to identify their daughter, but her father asked her mother to not go in there as he didn't want her to see Anita in that state.
We're devastated, naturally. I had to go and identify her. And I just couldn't believe that a thing like this could happen to somebody so beautiful.
Anita's autopsy revealed that she had been essayed. She suffered from lacerations all over her body, especially her breasts. Some of those cuts came from being dragged on the barbed wire. She had 2 black eyes that were swollen, a broken nose, and 2 broken cheekbones. She also has self-defense wounds believed to be from grabbing a knife. Her finger was completely sliced open from the tip of her finger down to her hand. On the same hand, there were multiple fingers broken, but on the other hand, several of her fingers were sliced off. Anita's ears and windpipes were also severed from the cut to her throat. Her eyes were wide open when they found her body, indicating she had looked her killers in the eyes. Police interrogated John Cobby, believing his separation to Anita could have been a motive for her killing. However, after intense interrogation, including alleged physical abuse by the police, John provided a coerced confession that detectives themselves doubted. John's mental health deteriorated rapidly. He struggled to cope with his wife's death and turned to heavy drinking and heroin use. The grieving husband was too intoxicated to even stand at his wife's funeral. On February 6, 1986, the NSW state government posted a $50,000 reward for information leading to the capture of Cobby's killers. On the same day, a host of a popular radio show, John Laws, obtained a leaked copy of Anita's autopsy report. He debated whether to share it on air and ultimately decided that the public should know. John felt that there were murders going on in Australia and the public wasn't aware of the details. And as you can imagine, the Australian public reacted with anger upon hearing details of Anita Cobby's murder, and we'll get into that soon. Constable Deborah Wallace was stationed on a switchboard at the time, answering and directing calls that came into the station, when she was approached by Detective Sergeant Rosetta during that first week of the investigation. She said, "He looked at me and said, 'How old are you?' And I said, 26. He said, 'How tall are you?' I said, 5'8". He said, 'I've got an idea. You come with me.'" On February 9th, Deborah retraced Anita's final movements step by step, reacting movements on the night of Anita's disappearance. The 2 friends of Anita's who were at dinner with the nurse on the night of her death took Deborah shopping to ensure her outfit was accurate. They hoped to jog the memories of travelers or others who might have witnessed her movements, but to also keep the media interested in the investigation. As Deborah approached the place from which they believe Anita was abducted, detectives asked her to stop. They said to me, "Deb, we're going to be following, but we want you to stop at that house number. We just want to get a feel for the time of day, the darkness, the lightness, etc." I wasn't scared. That wasn't the feeling I had, but I remember thinking, wow, a week ago there was this young, beautiful girl standing probably in this spot. A car drove past. She probably thought nothing of it. A car pulled up beside her and she probably still thought nothing of it. And then, in those moments, her life was over. Now, on the night Anita went missing, a 13-year-old boy and his younger sister heard something or someone screaming from their house. Just as they made their way outside, they saw the attackers forcing Anita into their car. The boy ran to help, but before he could, the car drove off. He made a police report once he got back to his home. A few minutes later, his brother arrived home. He told his older brother, who eventually drove off to search for the car. Moments later, he came upon an empty Holden. He used a spotlight to search the empty paddock. Seeing nothing, he returned home. The attackers later stated they had indeed hidden in the long grass to avoid the spotlight and waited for the man to leave. One day, an informant gave some details about a stolen Holden. Following this tip, police started searching for John Travers, Michael Murdoch, and Les, Michael, and Gary Murphy after they discovered that they had stolen a Holden. On the 21st of February, police found and arrested John and Michael at John's uncle's house. They arrested Les at John's own house. Michael and Les were charged with offenses relating to stolen cars and released on bail and under 24-hour watch. John, who admitted that he had stolen a car, had also made conflicting statements about the murder. He was detained in police custody. While in custody, John plots an escape with Michael and Les. Police were sure the reason they wanted fake passports was not for car theft. While also in custody, John asked for a cigarette. He asked if a friend could bring him one while he was in jail. The phone number was handed to the investigating police, who contacted the friend, a woman. This woman was actually John's aunt. She became known as Miss X. Miss X recorded John, agreeing to hide a recording microphone device in her bra. Later, Miss X went to the home of Michael Murdoch and captured his statement on tape as well. I'm going to play the tape for you.
Mrs. Murdoch? Yes, listen, can I speak to you? It's really urgent. We're there. Rick, please. Rick? Yes, can I please speak to you? I'm sorry. Rick, it's me. I'm sorry. I've got to talk to you. Can we talk, please? I'm sorry, Mrs. Murdoch. I didn't mean to wake you. Rick, I'm sorry. I just want to understand. I know everything. Really? About what happened. I know it all.
Now the hunt was on for Gary and Mick Murphy. Police followed every lead and even raided houses all over the western suburbs. The newspapers published descriptions and photos of the wanted men and warned the public that they were extremely dangerous and they were not to be approached under any circumstances. Then a man called to say the two men with the description of the wanted Murphy brothers were living in the townhouse next to him. Police concentrated their efforts on a block of townhouses in the southern Sydney suburb of Glenfield, about 22 kilometers south of Blacktown. They surrounded the block and waited. When a woman came out, police grabbed her. When she was out of sight of the building, she told them that the Murphy brothers had been there during the day but had left. Well, the police didn't believe her. They decided to go in. Police helicopters flooded the area with its searchlights. Police smashed the door to the townhouse and arrested Mick and Gary Murphy. Mick was sitting down watching TV and offered no resistance. Gary ran into a wall of police as he fled out the back door. One of the pursuing officers tackled him and the pair went sliding into a fence, scratching Gary's face. He would claim later that the police bashed him. They hadn't. Gary Murphy was so frightened that he had actually wet his pants. The brothers were taken back to Blacktown Police Station and charged with the murder of Anita Cobby. Word of the arrest was spread like wildfire, and an angry crowd gathered outside the police station once more, calling for blood. As many as 1,500 people blocked the streets around the station, waiting for a glimpse of the killers. At 9 a.m., the Murphy brothers were formally charged at Blacktown Court. People turned up at the Blacktown police station with the community and media calling for justice for Anita and venting their opinion as to what they believed should happen to these men. The nation was just shocked with the brutality of the murder and highlighted the need for better protection and justice for victims of such heinous crimes. Deborah recalled the day the Murphy brothers were brought into the station after their arrest. Such was the public outcry over the crimes that a mob of grieving, angered members of the community were waiting, ready to swarm. She said, "We had to all go out into the front of the police station and do an arm chain with each other to hold everyone back because they were trying to break through to get to the car. It was quite volatile." The angry mob also yelled, "Hang the bastards, give them to us for a minute." People spat on the cars and called for the prisoners to show their faces. As I mentioned before, these men were no strangers to the law, all with a string of criminal convictions. John had a history of violence. He was raised in poverty in Blacktown, New South Wales, Australia. He was an alcoholic at just the age of 14. In school, he was disruptive and eventually expelled in year 10. He mostly relied on unemployment benefits as a source of income, holding down just a few jobs. When his father left, he became the head of the household. John relied on stealing to provide food, taking animals such as chickens and ducks from nearby households. His mother eventually committed him to a juvenile detention center. The health of John's mother eventually deteriorated, and he and his siblings were sent to live with foster families while she was hospitalized. She died in 1989. John was the ringleader of the group of men that attacked Anita. He had a history of violent sexual behavior and bestiality, which he boasted about. He was actually wanted for savagely essaying a boy only weeks before Anita's murder. The boy's injuries were so bad that he needed hospital care. Michael Murdoch was a close childhood friend of John's. While he spent time in juvie, he was essayed and even wrote politicians during his stay in juvie to seek protection from such thing, which is quite odd considering what he did. Michael, Gary, and Les Murphy were 3 brothers from a family of 9. Michael Murphy was actually on the run at the time of the murder. The prison escapee was the eldest of the 9 Murphy children. Gary was 5 years younger than Michael. He faced several car theft-related charges in the years preceding the murder. Gary was known to have a very violent temper. Les was the youngest of the Murphy children, but was known as having the worst temperament. He had faced children's court on many occasions for a number of theft-related offenses before being accused of Anita Cobby's murder. The 5 killers planned to enter pleas of not guilty at trial, but at the last minute, John changed his to guilty. Initially, the brothers tried to point fingers at John. Trying to paint himself as her would-be savior, Michael said that John had decided to kill Anita because she knew their names. Michael told detectives, "I said no, leave her." But there was no way that he was going to leave her. The 4 of us walked away and he came up to the car covered in blood and said, "I cut her throat." When asked if he had been concerned she might still be alive, Michael claimed, "I didn't want her to be killed. He's a maniac," referring to John. Michael said John returned to the car covered in blood after killing Anita and boasting, "I cut her throat, it's my first one." Evidence at the trial included Gary Murphy saying he had heard his brother Michael saying, "Do your own thing," to John before Anita was killed. The court also heard that on the night of Anita's death, John's neighbor, Maxine Greensmith, had noticed a, quote, "funny smelling" fire burning in John's backyard. Miss Greensmith said she saw the 5 accused standing around it, drinking beer and talking in loud voices. Some of the men later did indeed tell police they had burnt Anita's clothing and even belongings in John's incinerator. On June 10, 1987, in the Darlinghurst Supreme Court, a jury found Anita Cobby's killer guilty of SA and murder, and they were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice Alan Maxwell said, "This was a calculated killing done in cold blood. The executive should grant the same degree of mercy they bestowed on their victim." Michael Murphy ended up dying at the age of 66 in 2019 from terminal cancer. Before his death, he was asked if he would apologize to Cobby's family. He responded by saying, "Why would I fucking apologize to anyone while you bitches leave me in this fucking hospital room and treat me like this?" Anita Cobby's widower, John, was elated Murphy had died. He said, "1 down, 4 to go. I hope it was painful for him." Following her death, Anita's parents founded the Homicide Victims Support Group, community support group that helped families deal with heinous crimes. They also campaigned in seeking tougher sentencing and truth in sentencing laws. Anita's parents both passed away. Gary Lynch died on the 14th of September 2008, aged 90, suffering from Alzheimer's disease. Her mother, Grace, died of lung cancer in 2013 at the age of 88. I can't help but wonder what would have happened if the payphone wasn't broken. It almost seems like the cause of her death was this broken, vandalized phone. I wonder if the person or persons who broke that phone ever thought, wow, I may be the reason why this person couldn't get home that night. The chances that she would have crossed paths with these monsters are very little when you think of it like that. Her father was waiting for her. Her father would have most likely picked her up that night as he had always done.